Hello and welcome once again to the Polymath project. This conversation is between me and Muhamet Lajqi. He is currently pursuing his doctorate in literature with focus on Dostoevsky. I personally enjoyed the conversation very much and learned a lot of things. I hope the experience is similar for you. Would you like to give a brief intro of yourself for the listeners?
So I'm a 27-year-old from Kosovo who is currently doing his PhD in literary studies, and I am studying Dostoevsky's works, specifically the themes of faith in his works. I believe we will get to the details in a second about that.
Okay, so why did you choose Dostoevsky in the first place?
Well, I never regarded myself much of a reader, but having gone down this path and studying literature in general, I thought I'd give Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov a go. And one sunny evening, I started reading it, and I didn't finish it for perhaps 6 months. But besides that point, by the end of it, I was very moved by his way of portraying faith, by his way of putting down these characters who are so alive and who present such different views, whether that be of atheism, of course, but also of this pure faith, which is unbound by institutions, as we see, because he criticizes the institution or institutionalizing faith in general. And that gave me a new outlook on life, to the point where I thought, well, this is exactly what I want to study in my PhD studies.
Can you expand a bit on what do you mean that he despises institutionalization of faith and religion?
Well, yeah, there's the famous chapter of the Grand Inquisitor there, where Jesus makes his way back into the world, and he is immediately, or almost immediately, arrested by the church of that time, so by the Grand Inquisitors, who say that he is pushing forward this agenda of people having radical freedom, and in that freedom that they choose faith themselves. But it is actually the church who is taking on this burden for people, so that they're not completely free. They give us even monetary means for the church to work. And this, you can see clearly that he disliked. He disliked having, what's the correct word here? A push, or he disliked forcing faith. Faith should be something that is completely and utterly free, a free choice that you make for yourself without any sort of fear or let's say a need that you want to be fulfilled. And you see this also in the story of the temptation of Jesus in the desert. And I felt that that was something that is prevalent, I think, in Dostoevsky's writing, seeing how he has grown up in a place where churches are, of course, very common. And we saw a shift in Russia also at that time, from Illuminism in Europe. And Dostoevsky understood that the only way that faith could be ever truly be counted as faith was in the context of freedom, even though this freedom, of course, also comes with suffering and doubt and all the other things.
It's very interesting that you point that out, because I've not obviously read the Brothers Karamazov, but I've read Notes from the Underground, and he talks about a very similar idea that you just said, uh, which is, I think in the translation which I wrote, it was written something like, uh, our most advantageous advantage. And
Right.
in which he basically tries to make the case that whatever we do, we are essentially reacting to something, or it is cause of something else.
Hmm.
So, so just to prove our freedom, right? To prove that we are absolutely free to do anything, he calls us to do something which is not, which does not lie in the realm of reason completely, or in the realm of, pleasure.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
basically something which is purely just for the sake of it. So I am absolutely free to, crush my fingers in the door, right? But I don't do it because it will hurt. But I mean, this is a really
But
exaggerated example.
sometimes people do it. Sometimes they do it though. This is also a part of the underground man, where we sometimes make choices that go against our own well-being, and it's a bit of a conundrum, because how do you explain to someone that the rational thing that you ought to be doing, you're not doing? So you're going against rationality sometimes as well.
Why do you think that is? Like, are we, in a way, do we hate? Are we, is it some sort of self-hate or something repressed anger, which is self-inflicted? What is that?
Well, I think in general, we see that Dostoevsky criticized rationalism quite a lot. And this might be due to several things. One of them is that you cannot reason your way out of life or into faith as well. There's a lot of things that we do in day to day life that don't particularly have a specific, let's say, cause or result that you want to achieve. Let's say you go out on a walk, but there's not particularly any reason why you go out on a walk. You do it because you feel like it, and that thing cannot be rationalized. And I think that's part of the problem with Dostoevsky's characters. We see that in Ivan, in the Brothers Karamazov, in the Underground Man. He says right at the beginning that he's a spiteful man, and he is precisely this way because he over rationalizes things. He's too aware of everything that he does and his causes and actions. And we see that also with Raskolnikov to a degree. So he tries to rationalize morality, and we see that you cannot see morality from a subjective point of view. Otherwise, you end up killing people, I guess.
Hmm, interesting. So, I'd like to I'd like to talk about this a bit more because this is this was very weird to me, at least when I first, came across this idea of his, that just to, it is the kind of argument he makes is sort of, it is similar to saying that you need to die just to prove that you are alive. So it seems very counterintuitive uh, just to realize your how actually free we are. We have to do something which is completely uncaused in a way.
Hmm. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I mean, that is precisely what I mean when I say it goes against rationality. In the grand scheme of things, you could relate this also to a passage in the Count of Monte Cristo where it says that you need to know that you have almost died in order to enjoy life in general. I think Dostoevsky in general didn't shy away from suffering whatsoever. In fact, suffering is one of the key parts of his novels. And rationalism is not something that always leads you to the best possible outcome, because this was also, as I said earlier, in a way a critique to the Western thought of that time that tried to move Russia out of this traditional Orthodox, let's say, breath that they were in, into a new way of thinking. And he was very opposed to that, because in the loss of that thought, you would also lose quite a lot of national tradition. But I guess it can hardly be surprise to people that you cannot reason your way out of life. We see this daily. I mean, we stay in toxic relationships. We procrastinate without really having a reason to do it. But you and me both, we do it. Everybody does it. And then there's also self-destructive behavior that people do. There's no reason for it, but we keep doing it. Yeah, this begs the question, even if you disagree with this, have you ever acted against your own best interests, knowing that you're doing it against your own best interests, but you do it anyway? Because I guess deep down we want to be free and to exercise this free will that we have.
Oh, I never thought of it this way. But can you elaborate a bit more on why does he emphasize so much on suffering? Because his characters seem to all of his characters seem to be a bit masochistic, at least
Yeah,
from what I have read.
yeah,
So why
absolutely.
is that?
It's
And how
actually
does it reflect on the real world, or is it just some sort of twisted thing that he uses in his stories?
yeah. I mean, it's an interesting thing actually. Before we started this, I saw this meme, let's say, of Dostoevsky, where he says Dostoevsky is the only author where the characters are suffering. The book in general is full of suffering, and the reader is also suffering. Um, for Dostoevsky, suffering was a constant in life. Perhaps this came also from his personal matters in life, the things he went through, but he didn't shy away, as I said, from it. To suffer is to be free, and we must suffer in order to get to truth. Uh, the quest here, I guess, in all of his works is to say that you cannot find a way out of suffering, but what you can do is you can pull up a burden or a meaning that trumps all this suffering. And he leaves this sort of thing, like the meaning of life, he leaves it like an open question. Is it something we create, something that is given to us perhaps, or something that we must suffer in order to truly understand? And in this way, all of his characters diverge. Some of them see suffering as um, something that is not needed. And here we have also the argument of theodicy, or how can God exist if evil exists? But then we also have other characters such as Alyosha, who sees suffering, but he also sees a way out of it. And it's precisely through suffering that you can get to a point. You mentioned earlier that you have read Crime and Punishment up to a point. So the characters there find meaning not in happiness but in suffering, especially the main character. I mean, we see that he has to undergo all this suffering in order for him to become someone who has faith or exercises faith in day-to-day life. And perhaps there could have been no other way of doing it, sort of like a butterfly effect.
Since you have mentioned Crime and Punishment, and since we are already talking about suffering, so
Hmm.
let's talk about one of the characters which I think is not often talked about a lot, but for me, he is by far the most interesting character in Crime and Punishment, at least to the point where I've read. So it is
Absolutely.
the character of Marmeladov, that
Right.
drunk guy in the bar, right?
Right.
So he seems to be, almost craving suffering in a way, which is very weird to me. Can you like elaborate on that? Why is that? And what is the significance of that character?
Right. Marmeladov is a fascinating character, as you mentioned. I think the whole scene at the bar is one of my favorite scenes in Crime and Punishment. We see this person who just starts rambling about his life, and Dostoevsky is quite known for that, for pages full of yapping, let's say. But Marmeladov is really interesting because he exercises his, let's say, his free will, as we mentioned earlier, by going to the bar and getting drunk. He knows it's not good for him, but he does it despite of that. So there's also the critique of rationalism mentioned earlier, and in general, you can see this image of an isolated man who lost pretty much most of the things in life. He doesn't see a way back, and in that suffering, he just goes and kills himself. This is also significant for the story. So the significance lies in the fact that Raskolnikov is presented here with a man who went down a bad route, let's say, and he wanted to kill himself. So Raskolnikov is kind of pushed by him to think about and evaluate life, whether there's really a way out, whether he is just like Marmeladov, or whether he will also do the act that Marmeladov did. And in this contemplation of things, we see Raskolnikov choosing a different route. So he goes and gives money to Marmeladov's family. And I think that highlights or foreshadows a bit of the events to come, that Raskolnikov is not the one who is in the same way as Marmeladov. So despite being an extra character, if we can call Marmeladov that, he is quite significant to the story in general.
Right, and like also it is probably my favorite Dostoevsky quote, which Marmeladov says in the bar.
Yes.
And in the translation which I have, I think you probably know which one I'm going to quote.
Sure,
But
go ahead. I'd love to hear it again,
Yeah, sure. So, quote, "It is necessary that every man have at least somewhere to go.
Yes.
So there are times when one must absolutely go somewhere." End quote. So what is this? Because and one more thing with suffering that is common with every that goes hand in hand with every character of Dostoevsky, at least every major character. That is, they always have this sense of they don't belong anywhere, because we see
Right.
that Raskolnikov, like, even when he goes to his home, he cannot sleep. He cannot feel like he's at home anywhere. And he obviously has tense relationships with his family and all. So this feeling of homelessness. So where this comes from, and when he talks about this thing, but there are times when one must absolutely go somewhere. So what is this place he's talking about? Since they
Yeah.
are not able to find peace anywhere,
Yeah. I
because
mean,
this,
yeah.
yeah, go on.
So yeah, as you said, it's not only literal, it's more metaphorical. We see people whose freedom is not grounded on something that's substantial or something of meaning. When you say that it is necessary for a man to have somewhere to go or to have someone to rely to, as is also one of the translations, we see that Marmeladov has already gone past that point. So there's a point of no return, and Raskolnikov is close to that. I mean, he treads that line throughout the whole novel. At every point, even in the bridge especially, which is also significant if we talk about symbolism, he tries to reason his way out of suicide. And his constant traveling is also, as you said earlier, a point of his freedom, which is not grounded on something that's of meaning. And the only point where we see actually Raskolnikov stay in one place or show, let's say, human sympathy or human emotions is right at the end of the novel, where he's meeting Sonia and is thinking about the future that they might have together. That's the only point where we see, even literally, that he is standing in one place holding hands with Sonia. And there he created finally that bond between something. But he was constantly searching for it. I mean, you can see that. Sonia, he went to Sonia a couple of times. He asked her to read from the Gospel, from the Testament, and Yeah, his search for something substantial is very important. I actually did a study of this quite recently on the existential themes in Dostoevsky, and freedom is quite a significant one, because people whose freedom is not grounded on something that is of value or something that is higher than self always end up doing something that is negative for them, whether that's being killed off or killing themselves. It's an interesting occurring theme in Dostoevsky's works.
Hmm. So let's move ahead because I've not yet read completely. So, like we have talked to the point where uh, until which I've read Crime and Punishment. So let's uh, talk about something which I have read because I'll be in a much better position to ask questions. That is the uh, Notes from the Underground. So
Hmm.
even the opening passage, right, where he says that I am a sick man and my liver is
Yeah.
sick and all, right? So we see a level of self-consciousness that he's aware of the state that he is in, and he's actively choosing to be that. So is he also exercising his freedom there, or there is an even deeper point being made there?
I think absolutely he's exercising his freedom in a radical way, one would say. When he says that his liver is diseased, we see that there's of course a meaning to it. He's lived his life in a way that is completely self-destructive, to the point where he cannot even go back to something that is of value or that would change his life path. And in this radical exercise of freedom, perhaps even to parallel it with Nietzsche's Übermensch, which seeks to create meaning rather than find meaning, we see that the underground man falls short of it. And he falls short of it because to think too much is a disease. So, to quote his own words, you cannot create meaning as a human being. The whole question of it, as is written in I think it was the Hitchhiker's Guide to Galaxy, who said, perhaps we're not asking the right question here. You cannot find meaning through human endeavors. The only meaning that is to be found must be based, partly at least, on irrationality or absurdity. There's a leap of faith, and this is what's missing from the Notes from Underground. He is a very smart man. He lives his life very rationally, but we see that this rationality is not something that is going to be the end all be all of good things to come.
It's very interesting that you made the mm, you compared it to Nietzsche's Übermensch, and like I intend to talk about the connection and like the juxtaposition there is between the Übermensch and the underground man. But we'll talk about it later. But let's just stick to this uh, passage for a little more time. And like in the end, right? In the end of this passage, he says, "But still, if I don't want to treat it, sorry, but still, if I don't treat it, is out of my spite. My liver is bad. Well, then let it get even worse."
Right.
So,
Ain't that something, right? That's quite something. I mean, when we see people, especially perhaps it's more prevalent in men. Sorry to interrupt you there. Um, when we are sick, like we don't wanna treat it. We're angry. We got sick in the first place, and we don't want to treat it. So it's an exercise of freedom again, but this time it goes against rationality. You're doing something against yourself that you know would be better for you, but you don't do it because it's out of spite that things even got to this point, perhaps. And yeah, quite an interesting character.
So what is this spite that he like? Because in this passage he talks about spite quite a lot. Because even in the first sentence he says, "I'm a sick man, I'm a spiteful man," and then like he repeats this over and over again that I'm not treating it because out of my spite, as he says. So
Yeah.
what is this spite that he keeps referring to? What does he
Yeah.
mean by that?
Spite, well, in general, spite of his current condition, which can be interpreted perhaps as spite against a higher power that brought things this way, spite against himself, and regret perhaps for the choices that brought him this way, spite against society, because there's also quite a critique of society there as well, and in Crime and Punishment too. But the spite is, in a larger sense, a component of human emotions. And when you exercise freedom, of course, you will have spite against one thing or the other based on your current circumstance. You know, I'm spiteful because I'm not a millionaire right now. Can Is that rational? Perhaps, maybe not. Perhaps it is. Who knows? But it's spite against your current status, current condition.
Can you talk a bit more about uh, the critique of the society that is there? Because it is often not talked about a lot. Only the individual side of it is emphasized on, like how the individual is feeling. But as you pointed out, there is critique of, like, I think uh, it is at some level in all of Dostoevsky's writing
Mm-hmm.
that he uh, criticizes the modern society or the society at present. So,
Yeah, yeah.
what is his problem with the society
Uh,
as it is?
he also brings this to a personal matter. You know, Dostoevsky. We see that in a famous quote also by him, he says that I love mankind, but the more I love mankind, the less I like man in particular. I cannot stay in a room with even the best of men. And yeah, I mean, he had the problem. He had a problem with society in general because of a couple of things. You know, in the 19th century, we have thinkers like Chernyshevsky, who was a radical materialist, who believed that rationality and progress would create this perfect world. Dostoevsky then, through the Underground Man, completely dismantles this idea. He thinks and thinks, and he sees that society can never be quite perfected. It can never come to a point where you would be happy with society because there's nothing more to be done and you're living in practically heaven. He argues quite often that humans are irrational and will do something against their own happiness just to prove they have this free will. In this, also, he mocks, as I said, Chernyshevsky, who believed in a scientifically perfect society. Um, there's also a famous quote, I'm sure you got to it, in Crime and Punishment that I want to read here. He says that even if you shower a person with every earthly blessing, you drown him in a sea of happiness, he will do something to destroy it, just to prove to us that he is a human. You know, he's a human and he's not a piano key. Uh, some people want to stand out outside society. I mean, you see that every day. Perhaps, how many times do you go about your day and you think, wow, this guy, thank God I don't deal with him all day because he's not a very smart person, let's say. And much to that, a lot of Dostoevsky's characters emulate that. They go through day to day and you see characters who perhaps are not as intellectual as the main character is, and that this drives them to a sort of superiority and a hate towards society in general.
Hmm. You remind me of another quote from Notes from the Underground that um, how can a man of consciousness have the slightest respect for himself?
Mm-hmm.
So And not on a similar note, but still on a parallel line, there is also one that goes something like an intelligent man cannot become anything seriously, and it is only the fools who become anything.
Absolutely.
So I guess it captures what you were saying about the development and how mankind will live, how mankind will live
It
in
captures quite a
peace.
lot. I'm sorry, it captures quite a lot of modern society as well. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, we have perhaps even world leaders who are elected, and yeah, people are regretful of it because, as Socrates said, democracy is not the perfect way of governing, because maybe not everyone should have a right to vote, but that's a topic for another time, perhaps.
Hmm. So do you think like when people choose a wrong leaders, they are also in a way uh, using their freedom just to make the wrong decisions?
Yeah, yeah, but the thing is, yeah, the thing is, people never choose leaders who are moral, you know, and morality is quite important here for Dostoevsky in general. And even in the Underground Man, we see that he believes that society's morality is fake. People pretend to be good, but underneath they're just selfish and cruel, and they work on their best interest. We see this in the Underground Man interaction with Lisa, who is a prostitute in the story. He pretends to save her, but in reality, he just wants to feel powerful. So there's a direct interest. There's nothing that is done unconditionally to help someone. And to him, in a larger scale, this is also present in society.
Hmm. Interesting. I think Nietzsche has also a similar idea. Like this is when he talks about, you know, the sheep or the herd morality, sorry, that the weak exercise their power just to feel powerful, just to, not feel insecure about their powerlessness. So anyway,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a reoccurring thing. I mean, people can either choose to exercise their freedom or go with the herd, and one of them is definitely the safer option. But is it the right option? That is something that you must quite think about.
yeah, and it is, and I think for Dostoevsky, the ends does not matter as much as the process matters. And I think there is also a quote, if I'm remembering it right. Man is a frivolous creature, and perhaps like a chess player, loves the process of the game, not the end of it. So,
Yeah, that's exactly what I mentioned earlier. He doesn't want to be a piano key. He wants to be a man, and it's a radical ego as well there. But at the end, all we should really ask ourselves: is the Underground Man right? Maybe society is flawed, but does rejecting it actually make life better? Is it better to live lonesome and a genius in your own right, or just bitter with society?
hmm. Anyway, let's come back to suffering, which is our, one of the main themes of this episode. So, to get started with it again, I have another quote from him,
Hmm.
again from Notes from the Underground. To love is to suffer, and there can be no love otherwise. So now he is equating love to suffering. So I almost see a double standard of him where he just wants to suffer. And I don't know if it is related to feeling free or not, but I think sometimes
Can you
his
hear me?
masochism gets the better of him.
Yes. To love is to suffer, right? And there can be no love otherwise.
Yeah, I was saying that sometimes to me it seems that it is not about the freedom that he wants to feel. It is just about that he just wants to suffer. And
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's also a famous quote there. Sometimes people are passionately in love with their suffering. Um, isn't that something? I mean, in the act of suffering, I think there's also a component that emerges from that. So you have it is a pathway to self-awareness. A redemption can be achieved through suffering or even salvation. So for Dostoevsky, suffering isn't just pain; it's a gateway to get to the deepest truths about existence. We see that he lived personally. Dostoevsky lived through immense suffering. I mean, he was in prison, he was in exile, he had epilepsy, gambling addictions, which brought about financial ruins, and his characters also wrestle with the suffering rather than to avoid it. Um, Suffering is a test of the soul at the end of the day for Dostoevsky. For him, hell was suffering to the point where you're being unable to love, because love is the most redemptive quality that Dostoevsky relied on. And yeah, suffering. If you want to read Dostoevsky, be prepared, to get deeply into suffering and perhaps reflect also on your own suffering.
oh, I don't understand. What do you mean by to suffer so greatly that you start to love? Like that that doesn't even makes any sense to me.
Yeah, I mean,
What do you mean by that?
yeah, to suffer is to love. I mean, those go hand in hand with each other. If you love life and if you live life passionately, of course, there are going to be moments where you suffer. If you want to live life in, let's say, a zombie-like state where your emotions are shunned out, then props to you, you're not going to suffer. But at the same time, are you really living? He sees this deep suffering, as I said, as redemption. It has to come with the price of living life and loving someone. And I don't know if you're familiar with the White Knights by Dostoevsky. We see there a person who is deeply lonesome, let's say, and he exercises love against someone. He shows it, and in the act of showing love, I think one invites a suffering, because there's always a potential that it's not given back, and that's quite a lot of times with a lot of things in life. It doesn't have to be a person. You love something, you chase after it. Perhaps half of the time you're setting yourself up for failure. To suffer is to love, but also to love is to suffer. There can be no love otherwise. I mean, we do a full circle and get back to the idea.
Yeah, I am quite familiar with White Knights. It is probably my favorite short story by him.
Hmm.
And I don't know if it is a short story or it is a novel because I
Yeah,
have I
it's a
have a
novella.
small,
Yeah.
yeah. So I have a small booklet, and I recently read it, by the way, like last month, I guess. And I was surprised by how much I liked it, because like and Dostoevsky also has a very interesting take on love,
Hmm.
because when I think the uh, character's name was Nastenka, if I'm not wrong,
Yes,
and
yes, the female name, but we never get to find out the male's name, which is kind of sad, man. I wanted to find out what's his name, but anyway,
yeah, yeah, I think that was intentional on his part.
absolutely. But yeah, I mean, that shows you like this dynamic of love, which you so often mentions. Love is a powerful force, and it's in every one of his novels. I don't believe you can call out a novel where love for someone or something is not part of it. His vision of love is something that is very, very potent. Love can redeem, but it can also ruin a person. But it's rarely, rarely peaceful in Dostoevsky's world.
And like for me, it was very. I love it the way I love it because I think it has like right up to the moment where it is all shattered on the last two pages. Like it seems like the best love story of all time. And but then
And you
he
wanted it to
arrives.
be true.
Yeah, and I like knowing Dostoevsky, I knew that what is going to happen. So what I did was I stopped reading when they like started hugging and all.
Yeah,
Because I did not.
you exercise your freedom for a different outcome.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. But obviously, then again, I read it. I read the last part, and I think and you will be able to articulate it in a much better way than I can. So in White Nights, like I think there is a quote which sums it up pretty nicely. That is a moment of bliss. Why isn't that enough for a lifetime?
Yeah,
So
haven't we felt like that at one point in our life? When you're in love, just everything clicks together, I guess. But that specific moment truly doesn't really last. But that moment should have been enough for a whole lifetime. But unfortunately, you get hit quite fast with the reality of life in that novella.
yeah, yeah, and also we see that how much how less involvement of the girl is required in his love because only a moment with her, and he like repeats this over and over in the story too, that only a moment with her, and he has enough memories for a lifetime just to like think back to those couple of days and just to remember her. And that is probably that is probably the reason because of which I love it.
Yeah. I mean,
Because
sorry to interrupt you again. A key quote there is also that the whole eternity of happiness could fit into that single moment. He is at the end of the day a dreamer. Love for him is a fantasy, something that is more pronounced perhaps in imagination than reality. His love for Nastenka isn't based on who she is, but what she represents to him. So she's also a chance for him to escape his loneliness. And falling in love with an idea for Dostoevsky, I guess, is easier than falling in love with a real person.
yeah, yeah, like that is deeply sad on a completely different level.
Yeah,
But
yeah. I mean, everyone who's been rejected at least once in their life would know this kind of pain we're talking about.
yeah, yeah. So let's get back to again our yeah, let's talk about loneliness for a moment. And
Mhm.
since you have wrote papers on it, or at least one paper on it that I've read, so let's talk about the loneliness, like the way Dostoevsky romanticizes loneliness in a way that he almost presents it in a you know godly manner, which is completely unheard of, or at least I've never seen it in any other writer, or be it any language. So uh, yeah, let's talk about that. Let's
Yeah,
start with that.
I mean, before there's even any discussion, I think people need to know how much of Dostoevsky's life played into his works. I mean, we see that he experienced deep loneliness in his exile in Siberia, in his addictions, in his struggles, especially financial ones. And then you have also quite some deaths in his family that happened. His characters, as you said, are often alienated from society. It's either by choice, by guilt, such as Raskolnikov, or they just don't fit in, like Prince Mishkin in The Idiot. Loneliness isn't just about being alone, you know. It's about feeling disconnected from others and from meaning itself. And this is a part where things get tricky for every character. It's not that you are not connected with people, but you're also disconnected with something that is higher than the people themselves.
How does it connect to the what we talked about earlier, that homelessness, that feeling of never belonging there anywhere, and like how much they suffer just to have a place to, as Mameladov puts it, one must have somewhere to go. So like there is const I think except for this underground man who is looking for ideas, other than him, everyone is looking for a place to go. And I
Yeah.
think our underground man is also looking a place to go, that is some ideas or whatever. It is not a place in real world, but some intellectual grounds that he tends to cover. But this journey, right, like the protagonist of White Knights also is looking for that place of belonging, and like Raskolnikov and everyone, right, in Dostoevsky's stories. So how does it relate to that?
Um, there's, of course, a direct link here between loneliness and freedom. Some people might call it a curse, some people might call it a gift. People, or in Dostoevsky's novels, or the characters, they often crave this freedom, but we see that most of the time they end up alone. This begs the question, is loneliness the price of true freedom? Uh, would someone willingly trade people just so that they can say that they live freely and they're not part of everyone's life, but they live their life completely by their own rules and doing whatever they want? Dostoevsky doesn't see freedom as just, political, social. As I said, it's deeply existential and psychological. We see what happens with people when they are isolated too much. Whether that be the matter with the underground man or Raskolnikov, I'm pretty sure their destinies would be different had they had people earlier who they could talk to and sort their problems out. Is loneliness a good thing? No, of course not. But a line has to be drawn here where we can say that most of the characters in his novels radically choose this loneliness because they don't think it is as taxing as it seems out to be later on.